Hello there all my lovely jewelry makers, I'm Christina at CSLdesigns, and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this cute hat link chain. Now of course it works perfectly on its own, for instance like a cute bracelet, but it can also easily accompany something like a pendant. And with it being a chain of hats, of course it's perfect for Valentine's. So if you want to learn how to make one yourself, then keep watching. So for this we literally just need our wire and the beads, and the wire that I'm using is a 0.8mm regular round copper wire. And then the beads here are some 4mm rounds. Now the specific ones that I'm using are some purple banded agate gemstone beads, but of course you can use whatever you want to, as long as you make sure the holes are large enough for the wire to go through. And as for tools, I'm literally going to be using my usual 3 favorite pliers. So first of all, the tweezer nose pliers here from Zoron, and then also the flush cutters. So I'm going to use these as chain nose pliers, the flush cutters because they have a really nice fine tip. And then of course I'm going to also be using my 6-step bell making pliers here. Now again, you don't have to use these if you don't have them. You can also use round nose pliers, or you could even avoid using pliers for what I'm going to use these for at all. And like usual, I'm going to leave the material list and any links that might be useful in the description box down below so you can check that out. Otherwise, let's get it all ready and let's get started. So to get started, we need to cut a length of wire, and what I have here is a length of a 0.8mm of about 15 centimeters. So this is to make one link with. Now obviously it's just roughly because the length you need your wire to be also will depend on the size of the links that you want to make. So obviously you can make your links larger or smaller, it's completely up to you, but just bear that in mind when you're cutting your lengths of wire here. And also just a little tip that I personally have found is when I make wire work, I tend to basically keep all the scraps of wire that I cut off. So I have little tubs of them. So quite often from projects, I'm going to have decent lengths left because I've used too much wire. So what I actually find for this chain here and this design is that I'm able to use a lot more scrap wire literally to make these links, because you only need a short length per link. So just a little tip to actually be able to use wire that you wouldn't otherwise be able to. So I'm just going to grab one of my lengths of wire here, and then we basically want to start about the middle. All I'm going to do is kind of basically bring the two ends together, making sure that it's a curve that I have. And what I'm going to do is make the ends overlap so we get a little loop like this. And then basically I'm just going to tighten this up. So I want this to be quite small. Now obviously, like I said, it's up to you how large you want your links to be, which is then part of here how large you want this loop to be will help determine how large the hat is going to be, obviously. Just smooth these out as I go. And then when you're kind of getting that loop here down to about the size you want, then this is the point where I'm going to start shaping the rest of the hat. Now, like I said, you don't necessarily have to use pliers for this. You could start bringing the wires down. So this loop that we just made is going to be the cleft of the hat. We're going to then create the rest of the shape. This side is going to be one half of the hat and the other side is going to be the other half. And the wires are going to meet on the bottom and create basically the bottom point of the hat. So you could easily just bring the wires down. But what I do like to do is use just some pliers here to help me, and this is where I'm going to be using my 6-step bell making pliers. And in this case, because I like my links to be fairly small, I'm going to use the second smallest step here, and this is just basically to help guide the shape in place when I'm doing the size of the hat. You could also, like I said, easily use round nose pliers. So I'm going to use that little loop we made to place my pliers basically on the wire coming out from the loop, but right up against the loop, making sure that second smallest step is what's on the inside of the hat. So it looks a little something like this. As you can see, I have the pliers right up against that loop. Then I'm just going to do one side at a time, because obviously start with the side where the pliers are on, and bring the length further around. And like I said, I'm just using the pliers here as a guide. You could easily bring the wire around without the pliers if you prefer that, and bring the wire down so it crosses over towards the other side, and basically imagine where the other side is going to meet up with it and create the final hat shape. So something a little bit like this. Then you can always go back and adjust it more, but then we're just going to place the pliers on the other side of that initial loop we made, and then bring this side around the pliers, again using the pliers just as a guide, and then cross over the other end of the wire. So basically they now form the bottom point of the hat, and you can see we have the hat shape in place. Now of course you can take your time and do any adjustments that you want to. Completely depends how you want your hat to look. So just work with that a little bit if you need to, but otherwise if you're happy with your hat shape, then we basically just need to fasten it in place on the bottom. Then grabbing my tweezer nose pliers here, I'm going to place them at the very bottom point there, but kind of on the inside, just on one of the sides, so one of the ends of the wire there, so up against the other end basically, because I'm then going to choose one of the wires. Now what you can just do here is if you find you have one end that's longer than the other, then I recommend kind of choosing the longest end here to be the one we're then going to bend downwards, just like this. So I just place some pliers there to be able to bend the wire against them and create a little angle, and this wire is going to then come straight down from the point of the hat, and you can just straighten up the wire if you need to. So something a bit like that. You can see we have the cute little hat shape in place. And then to secure the hat shape, we need to wrap the other end around the one we bent straight down. So what I personally like to do is take the same pliers that I just used here and put them right kind of at the base of the hat, just before that bend that we made. And that's just to kind of keep the shape of the hat in place so it doesn't move around too much, because I'm then going to take the other length here that's crossing over and bend that around right where the bend is on the other wire, and basically just wrap this around a couple of times right below the point of the hat there. So about 2 to 3 times will be fine. Something a bit like that. If you need to, you can squeeze your wraps together. So that's now secured the actual shape of the hat in place. Then I take my flush cutters and go cut off the excess, and always just make sure, because you're going to have a little end of the wire sticking out, to take the tweezer nose or chain nose and squeeze that in basically so you can't feel it, it's not sticking out in any way. So this is the hat in place. Now obviously we then just have the end of the wire, or one end of the wire, coming straight down and kind of open, and this is where I'm now going to add in a bead for a little bit of colour and decoration, and to kind of break up the hats there. So obviously we're going to have a bead in between each hat, and then obviously we need to make sure this bead is going to stay in place, and we also need to create a loop below the bead so we can attach the links together when we make more. So leave the bead there, make sure it's pushed all the way down, grabbing my same tweezer nose pliers, placing them so you have just a little bit of space above the bead, and I'm placing them kind of so my hat is laying flat. Then I'm going to put a bend into it about 90 degrees, and that is going straight backwards away from the hat. And now I'm just grabbing my 6-step bell making pliers again, because I like to use that same step now, so I know every time I make these loops I'm going to have these loops be the same exact size. But again, you can easily use round nose pliers for that. Place the pliers, in this case I'm using then the smallest step. Bring the end of the wire all the way back around over the top of the pliers. So we bring it all the way around and create a full circle. I can put those away and then grab my tweezer nose pliers again, and same principle as with the hat, I put them on the circle and just grip onto it so it doesn't lose its shape, while I then take this end and basically wrap it around that little gap of space that we left between the bead and the bend initially. And this is just to tighten it in place, obviously fasten the loop in place, but also so the bead gets tightened and stops moving around. So when you're out of space, grab your cutters, cut off the excess, and of course, same as before, just make sure that that is squeezed in nicely and it's not sticking out. So this is basically one link that we've just made. Now obviously we have the hat on the top and then we have that loop on the bottom. We then need to make more links and then start attaching them together. So of course the next link you want to make in the exact same way. So I grab a new length of wire that I've already cut ready, and then initially we want to get that little loop in place at about the midpoint of the wire. Doesn't have to be precise at all, but we overlap and create this little loop, and then we basically tighten it to the size that we want. Now what I just like to do, a little tip, is when I'm doing this part here, basically tightening this loop, because I like my links to kind of be as similar to each other as possible, obviously mainly in size but also a little bit in look. What I like to do then is, once I'm making this initial little loop, when you've already, obviously unless it's the first one, but after the first one, I like to bring back a previous loop, or previous link, sorry, that I've made, and compare them just to see if they're roughly or close enough to the same size. And these seem like they more or less are. Maybe just tighten just a little bit more. But just kind of compare that loop in the middle, or the cleft of the hat, just to make sure that they're similar enough. And then otherwise, we then want to continue making the hat in the same way that I showed you before. And again, because I'm using these pliers, I know that it's going to be more or less the same size, because obviously I'm using these as a guide. So just make the rest of the link until we get to the point where we're making the final loop. So I got to the point where I've added the bead in and I need to make that final loop. So I'm just going to show you that, because we then obviously need to attach it as well to the first link that we just made before. So again, making sure the bead is pushed all the way down. Place your pliers a little bit above the bead so we have that gap. Make the bend go straight backwards about a 90-degree angle. And then take my 6-step bell making pliers, using the smallest step, just like before, so these loops become the same size all the way. Bring the wire all the way around so we get that complete circle. Now here what I just like to do is, it's fairly closed right now, as you can see the wire's right next to itself. What I just kind of like to do is open it up a bit, just to make it easier to connect the links together. So this, personally as well, I feel like there's a front and a back to these links, but obviously it's not too crucial as they are very similar. But where the wire kind of crosses over at the very bottom of the hat, I kind of like to think of that as the front, and then I also make sure to finish off my wires all on the same side, which I then think of as the back. But obviously that's up to you. Now this link that I'm working on here, I need to connect before I finish off that loop to the first link that I made. So that means they need to connect in this way here. So I'm following how I want this to sit on the bottom of the loop, and it's going to connect into that loop we made at the cleft of the hat. So that means I'm going to just flip this around to then be able to put the end of the wire, the open end that we're working with, through the loop in the cleft of the hat on the link that we already made. And as I'm bringing this down to sit in place, that means it's going to then sit the correct way. Now obviously it's still open, so I'm just going to take my chain nose again, my tweezer nose, and then just close this loop kind of back up, because it was just, I opened it like that to make it easier to bring the existing link that we already made into place. So as you can see, it's going to be placed there. And then just need to kind of try and push this a little bit out of the way so we can get our pliers in on the circle, and then finish off the existing link that we're currently working on with a wrap until we get rid of all that space that we left and the bead is not moving anymore. So once you've got to that point, cut off the excess, and again push in the end of the wire, and then you have now 2 links completed and connected. So that's how we connect them together, using that initial loop at the very cleft of the hat to kind of connect to the bottom of the next link. And as you can see, we then have the beads kind of separating nicely in between the hats as well, and just adding a little bit of color. So you just want to keep going like this until you get the length of chain that you want. So I thought I would just show you how I would attach something like a clasp. So obviously on this end, which I guess you could call the bottom, we have an actual loop ready. So I will literally just use this loop to attach anything like a clasp using jump rings. But then on the other end is where we have the top of the hat. So what I'm going to do is pretty much just use the hat in the same way as when we're attaching the links together. So I'm just taking a jump ring here, of course just opening it up. Then I want to bring it through that loop at the very cleft of the hat, just like when we attach the links together. Now of course it all depends what you then want to add. In this case here I'm going to be adding an extender chain, and then it's just a matter of closing up the jump ring again to obviously make sure that it's nice and secure. So something a little bit like that. You then have the extender chain attached, of course a clasp if that's what you choose to on this end. So that's how easy it is to attach anything like clasps, or obviously whatever you want to use this chain for. So of course you can use the chain by itself. It's really cute just as it is. So a cute little bracelet, for instance, it lays nicely like that, and you get all the hats separated by all those beads there. Adds a bit of color to it as well. And of course you then just have your clasp that you can then attach it with, or you could also use it for necklaces, for instance. Now personally what I would do, because obviously this chain is kind of, you could say, one directional because the hats are facing all the same way. Now here I just have a pendant that I made just as a bit of an example. I'm not going to use this chain for this pendant, it doesn't really go, but just to show you what I would do is I would kind of make 2 separate chains. So I would attach one side like this, and then I have another length here that I would just, so like I said, make 2 separate lengths and then attach them like this. So basically the hats on both sides are pointing in the same direction, but that's obviously just personal preference. What I would personally do, attach them if you wanted to use the chain for a pendant, for instance. But that's then how you make this chain. A pretty simple and easy technique, but you end up with a really cute result, whether you want to use a chain by itself or in connection with something else. Now I do have many other chain designs as well that I have tutorials on, so what I'm going to do is leave a link to the playlist for all of those in the description box down below. But otherwise, I really hope you enjoyed this one. Thank you so much for watching it, and I'll see you in the next one.